Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on IT Emergency Preparedness. My name is Michael Sugrue. I'm the president of Pace Technical. I'm joined today by Shail Rizman, our CEO. Say hi, Shail.
Hi, everybody.
And we also have Noman Ahmed, our director of technology. And Noman's going to join us a little bit later on, as usual, in these webinars for our Q&A. So, yeah, this topic, obviously, Shail, right now, certainly on everybody's minds and has been on everybody's minds. Lots of people scrambling to keep businesses functioning over the last several weeks.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's absolutely right at the top of everybody's mind, and I think a lot of people noticed some real serious holes as they were trying to kind of move everybody remote or
Yeah,
close up the offices. So it's pretty
exactly.
timely.
So that's kind of what we wanted to talk through today. I mean, the majority of the content is going to be from the IT perspective of some things that you can do or some things that you need to consider to try and make your business a little bit more resilient to any kind of a threat that may come to you. So we're going to talk about some of the big things there. We're also going to talk a little bit about planning. So we have a lot of content. First, I think we have a lot of clients on the call and probably a lot of other people that already know Pace, but for those who don't, Shail and I are the founders of Pace Technical. We've been in business now over 20 years. We provide proactive managed IT support, managed security, and managed cloud services. We're an ISO 9001 company, and for the last 5 years, been a great place to work. So looking at our company, I think the reason most people work with us is basically for the proactive services that we provide. I mean, we're doing pretty much what most other companies out there are providing: centralized services, the monitoring, basic security backups. Yeah, we have a help desk, ticketing system, emergency support, and a project team that does server installs, office moves, client cloud migrations, things like that. But people really work with us for this proactive side, which includes technology alignment. So this is really important in the area of security and aligning your business to standards. The second area, technology consulting. So assigning a strategist for your business to help you with planning, preparing for events like this. And lastly, our client success team, which is proactively managing KPIs and the results that your businesses are getting, communicating with your business, and making sure you are getting the results as expected, working with Pace. Sound about right, Shail?
Absolutely. I'm saying in our sleep.
Yeah. So we've done several other training webinars over the last several weeks. If you missed any of these, you can access them. So we did a training on Microsoft Teams. We did a cybersecurity threats training. And then we also did training on keeping your culture alive while working remotely. So if you missed any of those or wanted any of your staff to look at these, it's all for free access on our website. Just go to pacetechnical.com and you'll find all these under the media dropdown. So here's the agenda that we wanted to go through today. First, I wanted to look at the business continuity and disaster planning process, kind of what you would go through. We're just going to do a high-level look at how you actually make up a plan and what are the elements of a plan. And then we're going to get into really these IT elements that we need to be looking at and considering. So cloud services, remote access, how you're backing up your data, IT security, and then there's some other considerations that we have at the end. So we're going to jump right into this. I'm going to turn off my camera just in case and make sure it doesn't get in the way of anything on the screen here. So we wanted to start out today with a quick poll question. I had some difficulty with this last time, so I'm hoping this is going to work.
There we go.
Here's our poll question. So who out there already has a written disaster recovery or business continuity plan in place? And if you're unsure, you can go no or unsure, I suppose. If you don't know if your business has one, just go ahead and answer there. We'll give everybody just a quick, another 20 seconds or so to answer this question.
We've got a couple people commenting that it's in draft, that it's obviously being worked on.
Okay. That's okay. Well, that's good. All right, so I'm going to end the polling there and share these results. So here's what it looks like. Looks like 27% have a written plan, very, very good. And 22% is a no, or maybe it's in draft, or they're working on it, or just unsure. So it's probably about what I expected. I mean, we meet with a lot of businesses, a lot of business owners. You know, it's we're gonna talk through it. It's a process to get through and a timely process. So it definitely takes an effort to get one done and get it done in writing.
Yeah, I'm not surprised with those results at all, Mike, considering what people, you know, this comes again to the top of everybody's mind when something like this happens. So
yeah. All right. So let's close this out and let's get right into things, starting with disaster recovery and business continuity planning. So we're just going to, again, do a kind of a high-level view of how you go about it. First off, just these two terms, a lot of people might think that they're kind of the same thing. So really the distinction comes into play. Like a disaster recovery plan is really the plan to recover IT systems after a disaster. And a business continuity plan is the plan to recover or keep things running, keep operations running, either during or just after a disaster. So as you can imagine, you know, the IT part of it and disaster recovery then is really an integral part of a business continuity plan as well. Obviously, everybody is really relying on their IT systems, obviously. So how you go about getting a plan made, there's consultants out there. This is all they do all day, every day. You can also make up a plan yourself. There's lots of templates, and we're going to have a resource at the end of this that you can look at, but even just doing some simple Google searches, you can find templates yourself. Now, I will say, well, looking around at a bunch of templates, a lot of them are very different. I think they all get to the same end goal, but I see a lot of them structured very differently out there in the free templates. Plans can really vary based on the size and complexity of your business. So a really small business that just does one thing may be a lot easier. If you're a larger company with lots of different departments, or you sell a lot of products, or you manufacture a lot of different products, now things get very complex. And so does then the size of the disaster recovery plan, because you have to incorporate all of those different elements of your business into it. So these things can get pretty costly, and I've seen them take months to complete. Again, you're going through the process of interviewing every department within the company and trying to think of everything when it comes to disaster recovery and what threats can come into play. So looking at some of the basics of a plan, everything starts out with defining a team. So usually the team is comprised of ownership, management, department heads, and you want to have a representative from each department or functional area of your business. That's important because you'll see as part of the plan, it is written so that you do have to accommodate for every different deliverable area of your business. And then the second area is documentation. So making sure you have an updated employee list, customer list, vendor list with all the contact information, backup contact information, mobile phone numbers, etc. And then IT inventory. So all of your equipment, software, obviously those vendors, and how to communicate with those people as well. So look, these are the very, very basics of just getting the plan underway. If you did nothing else, making sure that you always have updated documentation, and you even have a team in place that's responsible, that anytime something occurs, that, you know, emergency meeting, everybody knows who they are and what their role and responsibility is. Like, that's a good start to a plan. So getting into the other basic elements. So generally, one of the key components is listing and ranking all of your essential services. So all the key departments or the services in your business, critical vendors that you have to work with or suppliers, individuals and employees within the company that are integral to whatever services or functions. And also if you're manufacturing equipment as well will also come into play. So you're looking at these and you're ranking them based on their importance or what the potential effect would be on the business if lost. So as an example of an essential service here at Pace, our help desk would definitely be one. And there's really kind of two aspects even to our help desk. I mean, the first part is our people. So that's an integral piece to running our help desk. We need the people to be able to be on the phones to help our clients with issues. But the other side of it too is the IT side of it, which is the systems that we run on. So it's our IT management software that we install on all our clients' machines. And it's the remote access element so that we can remote into machines to solve issues and whatnot. So anyways, as an example. Another element is listing all the potential threats that you can think of that could come to you. So fire, flood, pandemic, cyber. You also have to think geographic too. So living up here in the north in the winter, certainly snow, ice storms, and things like that. A few years back, we got hit with an ice storm. We had a flood in our office. So we had to put our plan into effect and send our people home because there was 2 inches of water throughout our whole office. Thankfully, we have our system set up that we can accommodate for that. But some other considerations also that you have to think of. And then really the crux of the whole plan is coming up with the action plan for maintaining and recovering all of the essential services that you outlined. So in the midst of this, and you're basically going to have an individual action plan for each essential service that you cite. So this is where the tedious part comes in. What's the potential impact? Who's the responsible person for this particular essential service or area? Also citing a backup. You never know what the scenario is in an emergency if that initial person isn't available. How you communicate and to whom. How you're communicating with your staff, with vendors, with clients. When are you communicating with them? If you had to think about alternate staffing or relocating your staff, kind of like we're doing right now. Any kind of service modifications, especially if you can't go on site, let's say, to client locations, kind of like what we had to deal with right now during COVID. Any kind of scope changes in the service or the delivery, the timing of delivery of product, all those kind of things are considered. And then outside resources, if there's any outside people that you need to bring in to help you with any kind of a disaster or other people that you might need to lean on. Last but not least, within a continuity plan is testing. So it's putting on the calendar at least once a year to be able to go through all the content of your plan, update everything, update the contacts, all the information within your company, all the inventory, going through the action plan. Does it still hold true? Have you changed any technical things? Has any software changed? Has the location of your software or whatnot changed? Anyways, so that kind of goes through the basics of a business continuity plan. It's pretty much a big topic unto itself. Like I said to you before, I have a resource for a template that you guys could use. It's from the Business Development Bank of Canada. It's a pretty simple template. I think it covers off on most things. So, an easy way to maybe get started. So at the end, I'll put up that link so you can copy that down. Okay, so now we want to get into really the key IT elements that we wanted to go through today: cloud services, remote access, business continuity, and IT security. By no means are we going to be able to go through every specific of all these things today. So it's just important to work with obviously Pace if you're a client of ours, or with your IT vendor, whoever that might be, to go through all these considerations and help you prepare. So the first one being cloud services. Obviously, if you're already in a cloud, you've probably seen a lot of the advantages that cloud services have. Definitely over the last several weeks, you've been seeing those. But obviously, in a disaster scenario, lots of advantages to being in the cloud. Obviously, access from anywhere, multiple devices. It's a more controlled infrastructure, lots of redundancies built in, power, internet, climate, failover and backup for some. And I say in that for some because definitely not all cloud environments are created equally. Shall you know this? Office 365 as an example, they have a 90-day retention policy. So
Absolutely.
lots of people think, hey, I'm going to move all my emails and maybe even move a bunch of my files to Office 365 and we're golden, right? I guess all depending on if you have any compliance to meet for data retention, or even if it's just your own requirement for how long you want to keep data. 90 days may not cut it. Now, it's not to say that there aren't solutions out there, for our clients that are in Office 365. We're providing most of them with a solution that gets them either up to 1 year or even infinite retention of their data. But again, even cloud services, if your infrastructure is hosted somewhere, you can't take for granted that all of your data is backed up indefinitely or even backed up at all. So certainly questions that you're going to want to ask. So if you want to get in and get started with cloud services, comes in a few different ways. The first is infrastructure as a service. Basically, in a nutshell, it's really your complete infrastructure is hosted generally at a data center. So you wouldn't have any servers then on site. All of your servers would be at a data center and you'd be accessing them remotely. Some versions of this are called like desktop as a service or virtual desktop infrastructure, basically delivering a virtual desktop to your employees, again, wherever they are, whether they're in the office or they're remote, doesn't matter, basically the same experience wherever that they're at. So you're typically accessing your systems through some sort of remote protocol. Usually it's remote desktop, sometimes referred to as RDP or Citrix. Those are probably the most popular ones. You can also accomplish the same thing. We have several clients that do what's called a co-locate with us. They wanted to keep their own hardware. Just gives them, I suppose, a little bit more flexibility in moving things around if they wanted to. But you can basically take your hardware and locate it with a service provider at a data center. And basically you can accomplish the same thing. Second kind is hybrid. So typically a hybrid is a combination where you might have some internal servers or internal services that you have, as well as some hosted services. So in some cases, businesses are going to have applications that don't perform well or maybe are unsupported remotely. Pretty popular in manufacturing environments. Certain software that has to run machines has to be located locally. This is all sort of changing though as time goes on and internet connectivity gets faster and more reliable, but still a lot of that goes on. Then there's businesses that just may have made a big investment in their infrastructure. So they just purchased servers and they haven't extended or run out of the useful life of those servers. So they're going to keep running those servers internally. But maybe they're have moved their mail and or files potentially to a service like Office 365. So that'd be a good example and a pretty popular one of a hybrid combination. Hybrid is also a good way to start to make a transition to the cloud if you're not in the cloud already at all with any of your services. Maybe going like, moving mail out, maybe moving files out to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on a quick note there, Mike, we as Pace are use a hybrid. element into the way that we do things ourselves, and that most of our critical applications are obviously in the cloud, so we can have the agility to move and work from wherever we are. That's why we were so quick in being able to adapt ourselves and our clients to this kind of craziness that we're dealing with right now. But we also keep our file servers for speed reasons within our own infrastructure in the office. And one of the major things we have to think about in this case, and everybody does when they're going to the cloud, is the internet connectivity. If you're going to be completely cloud, you have to upgrade and make your internet redundant, because your entire livelihood is now dependent on machines that are not in your office. So
Exactly.
that comes up a lot.
Yep, 100%. So really the next element is software as a service. So software as a service is basically and just another way of software providers providing their software in a web-based version hosted on a cloud somewhere. Office 365 is a good example of it. Salesforce as well is another example. So they're good examples. So, in trying to prepare yourself and be a little bit more resilient to disaster scenarios, if you have opportunities to move software that you currently have hosted, or internal locally in your office on a server or whatnot, if there is an opportunity to move it out into the cloud as a web-based application, definitely adds to your resiliency. So most software providers are moving to this model. A lot of software providers, they want that kind of recurring revenue model. It also makes them a bit more resilient to pirating as well, using a hosted model like this, where people are paying them basically a service fee or a monthly fee. So if your provider isn't already offering something, I'd say that most providers are working on it or trying to figure out how to make a web version of their software. But not all web-based versions act exactly the same as the on-premise version. So that's something you definitely want to check out. I'll give you a quick example, QuickBooks. So internally here at Pace, we use the internal or the local hosted version of QuickBooks. But my wife runs a small business. She runs a dress shop, and she runs the online version of QuickBooks, and asked me to look at something one day. And I'll tell you what, I couldn't find anything on there. It's like the interface is completely different. So just, you want to do your homework before jumping to something else too. So some questions that you want to ask, looking at cloud services, what software or services could be hosted? Is the software that you're running right now available in a web-based version? Is the cloud right for you? I think a lot of people are adapting, even the people that were a little bit cloud averse based on the last 6-8 weeks. I think a lot of people are starting to embrace the possibility of cloud services a lot more. If you're already in a cloud, here's some things that you're going to want to check out. First off, how is your data and your systems backed up or made redundant from wherever the primary location of your cloud services are? What is the retention on the backups? We gave that example of Office 365. What would the recovery process be if there was some sort of major disaster at the primary data center where your stuff is hosted? And then lastly, what security controls are in place? How are you accessing your data? Is there any other security controls that should be put into play? Multi-factor authentication, VPNs, things like that, to make your access to cloud services more resilient. So moving on to the next area of remote access. So I'd say most people on the webinar are probably very familiar with remote access, even if they weren't prior to COVID happening. Anyway, so the most simple way, again, this is if you're not in a cloud and need to access resources within your office. The first and primary way, a VPN. So easiest way to think of a VPN is like extending a long network cable from your office that would run all the way back to your house. So really you're opening up a secure tunnel from one point to another and extending your network and all the security within your network infrastructure to whatever your remote location is. So VPNs just by themselves are good for file access. Some software runs okay, certainly web-based software generally runs fine over a VPN, but some software that might have like larger databases, large file sizes and things like that, because all that information has to push across the wire, across the internet, the performance on some software may or may not be great just running it over a VPN. So these are all things that you're going to want to, test out in advance. I'm sure that some people or have learned the hard way based on the situation right now. Not all software runs great over a VPN. So then the next thing you might want to consider is remote control software. Also, not 100% because not all software runs great over remote control software, but a couple of the most popular ones, the Windows built-in remote desktop, also called RDP, Citrix are really the two most popular ways. And optimally, you want to set this up within a server. It's just a lot more control over the users and the security and the experience that people get with accessing things remotely. I'm sure in a pinch, probably a lot of people, even right now, possibly on this call, are remoting in to a desktop in their office when they need to run particular software or access certain files. And that's okay if you don't have anything else in place. But if you could take a step back and plan a little bit more for it, a server-based solution is definitely a better way to go. So some things and some considerations when you're talking about remote access. First off, laptops versus desktops. So you get a lot more versatility with a laptop that you don't necessarily get with a desktop. Obviously, you save a little bit more purchasing desktops for people versus laptops, but certainly in the situation we've been experiencing now, if your users have a laptop, certainly primary users that do need to access remotely, having a laptop, we can have the same security, the same software, etc. on that laptop so that they take that home with them on a nightly basis. So whether they're in the office or at home accessing via a VPN, they have access to the same assets within the office and that we can manage and secure their devices the same exact way. So that's something that you want to consider as you're purchasing equipment as time goes on. We already talked about kind of a server-based remote access solution being more of an optimal solution, definitely using a VPN for security. And as Shale had mentioned, yeah, internet bandwidth and stability is really important, both in your office environment. So some people probably learned over the last several weeks the hard way, once you try and have remote access by 20, 30, 50 or more people in a remote environment, they're seeing slow performance because maybe their internet bandwidth isn't what it should be. And stability as well. But the other side of it too is that if people are going to have to work remotely, testing out home environments as well and making sure you're trying to put some contingencies in place, especially if you have employees that live a bit further out and maybe their options for internet access aren't as great as other people, and trying to see and do some research and figure out how you can make things a bit more stable, possibly teaming more than one internet connection together so they can increase their bandwidth, things like that. But again, you don't want to be caught in the middle of a disaster. It'd be better to have these kind of things set up and tested in advance. So all of these solutions, that's definitely our advice. Try and go through the motions beforehand. Before it's too late, you have a lot more options when you're not in an emergency scenario. So the next area is backup. So this is one area in IT that we've seen many advancements over the last 15 years as well. I meet with a lot of people. So I've seen businesses, some of them still using very, very old backup technology. And I don't know, maybe they're just not even aware that a lot of newer, much better technology exists. So just wanted to kind of run through the different types of backup because it's kind of really important to how you recover from data and how long it might take. So really the first and most basic type of backups from the dawn of time is file-based backup. So It's really just copying all the files and data within your system, and then trying to rebuild all of your systems. So if you want to recover from this, it's really the longest recovery time. You need new hardware, you need to install all the software, update all the software, install all your users, all the information, etc. Then go in process of migrating data. It's a really long, tedious process. So the next step up from that is image-based backups. So image-based is basically taking point-in-time snapshots of like an entire server, so that if you ever had to recover, you still have to build an environment to be able to run those servers, but the process of recovering is much, much quicker. So image-based is probably the most popular way of backups for right now. And then really the next step up from that is what we call a business continuity solution. So as the name suggests, there's already software and systems built in to try and keep systems running regardless of what kind of disaster scenario that you encompass. So it combines both image-based backups with basically a ready-to-run server environment in case something happens. So you're literally going to flip a switch and fire up this remote server environment, typically at a data center. Most business continuity solutions also include an on-site or on-premise solution in case, I don't know, maybe your server, has a complete meltdown and is not functional, that you can have a first layer of failover locally to an appliance internally that can function as a server. But typically with a business continuity solution, recovery happens generally within an hour. And then really the higher step up is having a redundant or replicated hot site. We see some businesses that have multiple locations that do this with like a secondary office location or a secondary site, or they might replicate to a data center. Obviously, this is the most costly solution because you really need to duplicate all of your efforts and duplicate your infrastructure at a secondary location. But obviously, the quickest recovery time, basically in potentially seconds to minutes recovery on that one. Just quickly, the types of backup storage. I still see companies out there with tape, although tape is all but pretty well dead in the marketplace. It's not as reliant and the storage capacity isn't as good as some of the other options. Then we see, companies, with a basic level, they might use a USB drive or an external hard drive for internal storage, the first layer before they send stuff offsite. But I still do see a lot of companies that do a backup locally within their office and still don't have anything, external or on site. That's a major, major point of failure. Local network attached storage is another way. Then there's server-based. You could use a server for storing backup files, whether it's file-based backups or image-based backups, doesn't matter. And then there's, like I said, a business continuity appliance. So it can function as a server and be that first point of failover internally, or even running in a cloud scenario as well. So those are the types of backup storage. So here's kind of what I wanted to get to, really based on the type and the way that your information is being backed up, the time to recover varies greatly. So if you're on a really basic backup, I mean, I put 5 days in there, but I see companies and businesses taking way longer with a file-based solution. I mean, if you think of it, if you're losing hardware internally in the office, you got to go out and get new hardware, get everything all installed, set up. You might have to get other software vendors involved to help with the installation and configuration of particular software that you run, and then bring back and migrate in all the data. Pretty tedious process. If you have image-based, you still have to go out and get new hardware, and that's usually where the time factor comes in. A lot of people don't have servers just sitting on a shelf waiting, and ready to go. Image-based that has a cloud-based backup. Again, not all environments are ready to fire up and run those. environments, so it does take some time to get them prepared and ready to go, and then ways to be able to connect the staff if you're working remotely to get secure connections to those resources in the cloud. And as you can see, business continuity and a redundant solution aren't very far off. Now, all of our clients, we standardize on the business continuity solution that we implement with every client. It's that important to our clients to know that they can recover. Fire, flood, doesn't matter, within an hour. So some questions to ask regarding your backups. A, if you don't already know, and I'm surprised, I meet with a lot of business owners, a lot of them don't know, what is the process and timeline for recovery if you had any kind of a disaster, fire, flood, disaster, theft, cyber incident? Would new hardware be needed if you lost access to your servers? If the office or server equipment is gone, is there a cloud option? What's the process and timeline for getting that fired up and running and getting people connected to it? All of these things, you should be doing a fire drill and testing these things out. And for cloud users, kind of mentioned it before, what is the backup and failover for whatever cloud solution you have, and what is the retention for cloud systems? What is the data retention? Does it meet your requirements? So now we're going to move into IT security. So I like to say cybersecurity is kind of like the new age disaster that we have to add to the list: fire, flood, now cybersecurity. So I really had to look at some of these statistics and do a couple of other checks, because some of them, man, it's crazy. They almost don't look real. But even just looking at the first few, almost half the cyber attacks are targeting small, medium businesses. Why? Small businesses don't spend as much money protecting themselves from cyber incidents, so they're just easier targets. Obviously, the big businesses, you make a little bit, these criminals make a bit more money in one location, but hey, they're making lots of money off of small businesses right now. 1 million cyber attacks attempted every day. Last year, 10% of breach small businesses shut down, went out of business. Like, these are crazy statistics. So a lot of people want to know, what's the biggest threat to businesses? Shale, what do you think? I got a few down here. Not having a good firewall, not having good antivirus, maybe using a remote access solution. I don't know if people have read in the news, but it's been a big target, the security levels of remote access solutions. And then lastly, maybe people clicking on phishing emails. What would you say? You think one of these might be the biggest threat?
These are all pretty much up there. I mean, we have to deal with this on a daily basis. The phishing right now is what we see the most action
Yeah.
with clients
Okay.
specifically.
I'm glad you said that,
Yeah.
because I'm sorry, but this was a trick question. Because just having all of these things isn't really the issue. The biggest issue is security process. Look, almost every business has a firewall, and firewalls pretty much do the same thing. They block everything until you start opening up ports and access. But if you don't have a good security process for looking at the configuration of your firewall, how people access things, checking settings, checking logs, things like that, yeah, you're going to have security holes with your firewall. Same thing with antivirus. If it's not managed properly, updated properly, things are checked properly, yeah, you're going to have holes and threats. The remote access solution, if it's not secured properly, and if you're not going through a checklist to make sure that things are set up, configured, secured. Phishing emails, people click on bad things, but if there's not a process in place for educating your people on what the cybersecurity threats, and not just educating them once, but re-educating, like, this is a moving target, cybersecurity, and these criminals are really, really organized. They're well funded, and they're changing things on the fly, and they're getting better and better at this. So we have to be more resilient, not only educating our people on a regular basis, but even having the means to try and test our people to make sure they understand and are studying this material. So look, cyber criminals, they're preying on a lack of organization and process. Like I said, a lot of small businesses aren't spending as much on cybersecurity. But most businesses already have the basic tools in place: firewall, antivirus, spam solutions, monitoring. But really what's lacking is that proactive management for process, um, for looking at tools and managing those tools. Um, we see a lack of alignment for IT and security controls and standards. Like if you don't have that alignment process and that process for checking things, you are going to have what we call blind spots, and blind spots is areas of risk. Um, right now in COVID, we're seeing some businesses where all the security measures they have in place were designed to protect users when they're working in their standard office environment. But now when you move people out to remote locations, now we're starting to have to make some compromises in security to get people access to their systems and whatnot. So again, having good process in place would ensure that you're already thinking about those things and having security controls in place, whether people are in the office or remote. And we already mentioned it before, end user lacking the initial and ongoing training to stay safe. So some of the things that you want to look at and have in place with IT security: first off, the bare minimum, having a firewall, antivirus, or some sort of endpoint security and backups. I think everybody probably has this in place already. But what a lot of people don't have in place, and what we're big sticklers about, and this is like a key element to our process and our service and why people work with us, is security process. So it's the process, not just process, but the dedicated resource responsible for these proactive systems, security checks, and alignment to standards. One way you can accomplish this as well, adapting a security framework. A couple of the popular ones, the ISO and NIST. NIST stands for the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Basically, our alignment process is based on some of the security controls within NIST. This diagram here kind of goes through the NIST framework. It's basically a framework of identifying threats, protecting, detecting, and then responding and recovering from those threats. So some considerations for tools and other things within IT security. Again, trying to think in advance about making yourself more resilient and more prepared for any kind of emergency or disaster event. So first off, the basics, we already talked about having a firewall and antivirus. But secondly, next gen endpoint protection. Like this is another area where the products out there kind of vary differently, but a lot of the next gen products like we use with our clients, they include antivirus, malware, spyware. They're web-based and they use artificial intelligence. So they're gonna do a little bit more things like understand that a machine is acting unusually, or if it notices it's starting to encrypt a whole bunch of files on the machine to kill whatever process is doing that because it's just unusual behavior. So talking with your IT provider about options there. And then there are protection softwares that you can get for phishing protection that will protect. Yeah, you want to educate your people, but sometimes people, for whatever reason, and cyber criminals are pretty good at wording these things to get people to click on things. So here's a couple. These aren't the only things that are available on the market, but just a couple of examples. One is some software that works based on protecting links within an email. Obviously, the way most phishing is comes via email. So basically what this software will do is inspect the pages of links that are embedded within an email. So when somebody clicks on the email, it's going to do a quick check against known sites and against a blacklist to make sure that it is safe. By no means are these 100%, but they're pretty good. The product that we use for several of our clients, and if you're a client and not using this already, you can just speak to your business advisor or strategist about this, is DNS layer protection. So this even just takes the email out of the equation and says, whatever web page a user is going to click on, we are going to inspect the address of that page against a known blacklist. The product we use is called Cisco Umbrella. That's basically how it works. So it goes beyond just the email portion of it, because you can click on a website and that might have a link to another site, and it's the other site is where the bad stuff is going to happen. Multi-factor or two-factor authentication is something that you should be considering definitely for any web-based applications. We have it running for all the software that we access internally here, but certainly web applications such as if you're using Office 365, we think it should be mandatory. The threats and infiltrations on Office 365 accounts has been rising and rising. It's a big target for criminals just because so many people are moving to it. They can do lots of things if they get access to your ID and password credentials. But multi-factor or two-factor authentication is just another authentication beyond typing in an ID and a password that most likely a criminal isn't going to have access to. So ours we use with our mobile phones. We just have an application that runs on there that generates a unique code that only we're going to have on our phones. So even if somebody had access to our passwords, they wouldn't be able to access our web-based apps. Having a VPN for remote access of any kind is definitely a good security layer to have in place, especially if you are running remote desktop or TeamViewer or some sort of remote control access into an office. And then another security tool that you can consider is advanced security operations services, where it's basically deeper event monitoring. It's monitoring all the logs of the firewall and systems coming into the network. Just because these logs are generating thousands and thousands of log events every day, like the human eye could never go through every one. But they have software and systems that go through and they're looking for very, very specific things, and they'll either alert you or they have a team of people that's monitoring these things, and they'll act on your behalf if they see some sort of cyber event happening within your infrastructure. Then there's security training and testing, which we feel is really important. Many of our clients, we implement a service, it's called Know Before. And Know Before is both training for people, it's training modules and educating people on the latest threats. They update it regularly with new information and new threats as it comes out. But it also does phishing simulation and testing for your people. So it sends them test emails to try and see who gets tripped up by emails. It also has the ability to go in and see who's actually completed the training and done quizzes at the end, so they know their information. And one of the last things I'll bring up, these are by no means all the tools that are available, but one other important one many of our clients use is dark web monitoring. So this is basically a notification service. It's looking through several sites on the dark web that are posting for sale, generally compromised credentials. So your IDs and passwords for web-based applications and things like that that criminals are selling on the black market. It'll alert you if something comes up. You can go in and make sure you change your password on anything that's compromised. Some other considerations to think of, we already kind of talked about laptops versus desktops, also versus dumb terminals. Again, laptops are probably the most versatile, whether you're on cloud systems or not. Telephone systems is another consideration that probably caught some people up in the last several weeks. Having a standard telephone system versus a voice over IP or internet-based phone system, but even all voice over IP systems are a little bit differently. Like you have to look into things, basically ensuring you have the means for remote access. Some solution require you to have additional software licenses to run the software remotely or run it on a mobile app on your phone or to run a soft phone. You might consider purchasing and having handsets, at least for primary people in the company, so that they have a handset at home that they can function with. But looking into and kind of going through that fire drill to make sure that your communications are going to be there if you are home or working from a remote location. And then how you're going to communicate with your people. So a lot of people had to figure that out the hard way as well. But consider remote apps such as Microsoft Teams. Luckily for us, we started using Microsoft Teams well before COVID hit. So we made it just part of our daily routine. And that's what we recommend with people. Having this into the daily routine of your people. So let's say you have somebody, working from home on a particular day, making them a part of all of your daily meetings, and using these remote access to make them a part of it, and not just saying, they're working from home, so they're not going to be here. That's a great way to get into a good routine of keeping the communications up so that nothing's a big surprise when you get to a remote environment. And then lastly, power. Again, by no means are we covering everything, but this is a big one: power and internet redundancy. Looking at that in your office, what's the runtime on servers and systems if you have a power failure? Internet redundancy in case one internet connection goes down. All those things need to be considerations. So with that, that's all the content that we had for you today. Shale, did you have anything else that you wanted to add in there?
No, you've covered everything. I mean, really the big takeaways here, I think that, I didn't want to get in your way with, we had so much content to deliver here, but
I know I was kind of on a roll there.
yeah, it's exactly. But, the way that you hit on process, and it's one thing to have tools and all of these things we can do to separately attend to security and separately attend to business resiliency, mean nothing unless you know how to combine those tools together and put them in the mix, and use them properly.
Yeah,
so that's
exactly.
what we've seen with a lot of people out there who've come to us about this, is that IT providers basically can come in and throw in a bunch of tools, but when the crux is there, their execution isn't good. So
exactly.
You've got to have both of those things.
Yeah. So I promised you one template if you wanted to look at a free template for, there's a whole bunch of them that you can find if you do a Google search, but here's one from the Business Development Bank of Canada. Go to bdc.ca, then you go to tools, and then I think the next selection is entrepreneurs tools. I didn't want to put the whole URL here because it's really long and complicated. But if you go there, go to tools, entrepreneurs tools, there's everything in there. Like they have lots of templates on business planning as well as business continuity templates. Of course, if you have any general questions after the fact, we're going to take some questions now. But you can email me, mike@pacetechnical.com. Also, we have a lot of information on cybersecurity news. Again, access to our recent training webinars. We'll continue to add content to that as time goes on. If you have any ideas for content, certainly email me of things that you'd like to see in the future, and we'll do our best to try and deliver on that. So we're going to get to some questions now, and I'll bring Noman up as well. I think maybe the first couple of these I can probably even answer myself here. First question is, if we're with PACE, does that mean we're on a 1-hour recovery time unless we've set up a replicated hot site? The answer is yes. If you're on our Datto backup service, yes, recovery from any disaster generally within 1 hour. Will the slides be available to us? Yes. So a recording of this webinar, we're going to send access out to everybody that's on the call here, and then probably make the content available on our website as well. How can I monitor staff productivity during the pandemic? Noman, you want to tackle this one?
I addressed this actually, Mike, last week or a couple of weeks ago when we were doing the last webinar.
Yeah.
The same question was asked, and certainly Noman can jump in with a technical answer here. But there are many different ways. It depends on how. I don't know what the best way to describe this is, how in depth you want to be about monitoring staff activity during this pandemic, but there is a lot of different options through software or different kinds of monitoring.
So I have had people ask me about this in the past, and it was some people looking for, like, they wanted a solution for monitoring people through a webcam while they worked at home. And years back, we actually even had an article on our site just kind of dealing with this. And our article, I think some people took it the wrong way. Our article was really about being able to communicate with your staff remotely, not necessarily watching everything that they do, although that is a component that you can do. So, one thing that you can do if you have remote people, I mean, some people do it to that level where they have a webcam that's always on. Might feel a little bit Big Brother-ish about that kind of a solution. But I think what we tell most people, when you're monitoring staff productivity remotely, really still the best tried and true way is through KPIs and having your people have like daily goals and targets that they need to hit and measuring it that way. There are a couple of pieces of software that I believe have come available. We've never implemented one where you can actually have a webcam up and monitor people and kind of like jump on their webcam, regularly. How we've been doing it is using Microsoft Teams. We still have our regular meetings. We're checking in with people, and just kind of right now in this remote environment, trying to make it as much of a local and in the office environment as we possibly can. So generally any conversations that I'm having with staff, I'm doing it through Teams and doing it with the webcam on, just so we can see each other a little bit more
Yeah.
of a
And
human experience, so to speak.
Well, that's exactly it. We try and keep our culture, in exactly the same way as it was, or as close as we can in the office. I love that you mentioned the KPIs, because certainly for PACE, that's a massive a priority for us. It's the way that we can keep ticket levels to to where they need to be, as well as every single one of our departments has key performance indicators that they need to hit, whether they're in the office or out of the office. And so if your productivity is the same. And again, I think, like Mike said, that is the most important and the best, most accurate way to monitor the staff productivity from home, for sure.
So next question, is there a free cyber monitoring tool that you recommend for small businesses? Noman, do you have an opinion here?
That actually, Mike, that actually depends on what you're trying to do. If you are talking about the dark web monitoring, then there's a couple of websites. But again, if you're not using a service like the dark web monitoring service that we uses, then it's more reactive. You have to go in and keep remembering to check your domain, your IP addresses, compared to a service like a dark web monitoring where things are being checked all the time, and when any data is found, it alerts us and we alert our customer, and then we take actions on it, right?
Yeah.
So and then if you're talking about a DNS filtering, then there are a few other DNS filtering tools available that are free, but again, there's no such thing as a free coffee, right?
Yeah.
No, I was just about to say, Noman, the same way that obviously this is where you're going is, like, this is a great example of you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
Do you really want to take, the risk with this kind of thing by just throwing in a free tool? It's much more serious than this. That's the blunt, frank answer.
Yeah. Okay. Which IT element is the most important to have if you can't afford all of them? I'm going to assume maybe that this is related to cybersecurity, or
I think it's related to cybersecurity. So
Yeah.
if we answer in that context, then right now, if you cannot afford, let's say, the DNS filtering or the dark web monitoring and stuff like that, multi-factor authentication, I would recommend that you had that done
Yeah,
as soon
to
as
protect
possible.
your web-based apps. I guess we're going to assume that, all right, everybody's going to have a firewall. Everybody's going to have some sort of like endpoint antivirus or endpoint security. Putting those out of the way because pretty much everybody's going to have those. Yeah, that would probably be a good one. What kind of successful processes have you seen for password upkeep with companies with greater than 50 employees? Noman, do you want to talk about that? I mean, I would assume that we'd probably be just talking about having a standard password policy in place.
Yeah, so we when it comes to a password policy or a password upkeep, there is a couple of things. One is obviously a password policy for the users, and then a policy for accounts that have more rights, like
Hmm.
admin accounts and stuff like that. And then the third thing, which is most of the time what we see is kind of falls through the cracks, is shared passwords. So,
Hmm.
passwords that are shared because of it's a banking site or a government website or a RFQ sites and stuff like that. Um, what what Pace does is Pace do provide, and there are a lot of free password, not free, but like a decent password tools available. So
Hmm.
having a tool where you can actually save your password, like LastPass or Passportal, or things
Yeah.
like that. That's kind of the starting point instead of using what we see is an Excel file
Yeah,
with a
no
Yeah.
bunch
man.
of passwords in there,
That's
right?
not good.
No, no man. You mentioned the whole thing about password policy. Maybe you can talk about what exactly a password policy is for the attendees that may not know what that is.
So a password policy on a domain is basically a schedule. It depends on it drives how long the password needs to be, how often it needs to be changed, as well as how complex it can be. You really don't want to create, and we have done this, obviously with all our clients as well. We tried putting a long password, but then what we notice is people end up writing it down, right? Then you're not really using a password if you have it written down under your keyboard, right?
Hmm.
So you have to find the middle ground. And what we see is anything like an 8-character password with at least a 60-day password change notification. That kind of what the standard password policy we like to implement at least.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
gets rid of a lot of issues just by doing that. And I guess the way that we're getting around that, kind of augmenting that and not having those massively complex passwords is now through multi-factor authentication. So,
Hmm.
we're putting two, like Mike had indicated, we're putting at least 2 points of passwords in place at most of our clients. We're on a real push for that now. So
Yeah.
our clients out there have probably actually already heard from our client strategists on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to, with the multi-factor authentication, it does allow us one additional thing, right? Like you don't really have, it's good to have a complex password, but you really don't have to have a really complex password. Because what we have seen in the past is people use the same password or a variation of a similar password on what they were using on their network, on their LinkedIn site or on their Facebook accounts or on other accounts as well, which is not really a good habit, right? To do. All right.
Okay. Next question. What is the best type of backup that is inexpensive for a small business? So I'm going to just start the answer with this one. I'll let you guys chime in if you want. But generally, when we're looking at backups, the first thing that we have to look at is the recovery time. Like, what is your objective? How quickly do you want to be able to recover? Usually we work backwards from that, and we'll start with the most optimal solution. If we can't get that, if that's not affordable, then we'll work our way backwards. But there are inexpensive ways to achieve, like either file-based backups or even image-based backups. But the recovery time, again, is just going to be longer. Like if you're a business that can, deal with 3 to 5 days of downtime, if that wouldn't be an issue to your business, yeah, you can probably get away with using one of the more inexpensive and more basic type of backups. But if your business, would really be hindered, then you're probably going to want to invest a little bit more. But so the hard question, not knowing what kind of budget or what inexpensive means to you to be able to answer that question. Anything else to offer, Noman or Shale?
Well, I mean, we include, we don't even call it backup anymore. Like you referred to it as disaster recovery or business resiliency. That's built into what we deliver. So it's not even an option for clients. We have a solution that's built out, process built around it so that everyone gets that. Again, it's this whole thing about, and I hate to be redundant about this, but it's the whole thing about you get what you pay for. And you have to pick and choose the things that you want to take the business risk with. Is your backup, is your disaster recovery one of those things? And I think, Mike, that you've been, really conservative in saying, up to 5 days to recover. I mean, sometimes servers take well more than, if you have to order a new server, it takes 2-3 weeks to come in, right? So there's possibilities. I mean, these are just kind of estimates.
Yeah.
It all depends on how much you rely on your technology. That's the bottom line, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is inquiring minds want to know, is Zoom itself a safe program to have installed, especially now when people are working from home and using it more? So as far as Zoom goes, with security, like I think the bigger, there's kind of two areas of security breaches with Zoom. One was that Zoom itself got breached and some people's IDs and passwords got compromised. So that's one thing, just making sure that you're changing your password regularly. Zoom has already gone in and closed up holes on some of the other security. They just put out a big, I don't know if anybody here has updated Zoom recently, but it's a big update to the Zoom client, which definitely has a bunch of security measures in place. But how you set up your meetings in Zoom and or webinars, making them password protected and looking into, there's a bunch of variables as to what attendees can and can't do. So obviously we've seen maybe in the news, people barging in on Zoom meetings and sharing their screen and putting all kinds of nasty stuff on the screen in the middle of someone's meeting. But there are controls that you can have in place, who gets invited, how you allow people into the meeting, requiring a password, all those kind of things will make Zoom more secure. Can I say 100% that Zoom is 100% safe? I don't think anybody can say 100% for sure. I don't know. Noma and Shale, do you have an opinion there?
Can we say that about anything?
Probably not.
Right? Like that's what it comes down to.
Yeah,
But based on all the press and everything that Zoom has got, I guarantee you they've done a bunch of security work.
Yeah.
I think you got all the points out there. And your last webinar was actually based on the security. That has more answers. The same question was asked over there.
Yeah.
And the tool itself is as good as the user, right? So if you don't put the options that are already available within Zoom, you're not updating the product, then yes, you're going to be vulnerable to an attack, right? If you are following the good practices, again, we're going to go back to the process thing. If you're following the good policy and the process that you need to set up a good meeting, then there's no problem with the program itself.
Yeah. Okay. This next question, I think I can start an answer, and then I'll let Noman chime in. How often should we review patch updates, and which, along with that, and how often should we review which user or workstations have not updated patches with our IT provider? So one of the things here, a lot of providers like us, we have these tools that generate automated reports. One of the reports, it scans machines and sees how up to date machines are against what we have cited as what are the most recent patches and updates to the operating system in the computer. So it'll generate a score or show you a pie chart. So a lot of people can take some comfort in this kind of auto-generated report that they get sent. Typically it gets spit out once a month, and it'll show you a pie chart. Here's all the machines that have all the patches. Here's some that are missing one or two, sometimes because machines are turned off at night and things like that. But what I want to caution people, these kind of reports are auto-generated. So as a provider, I know this firsthand, because when we started using our IT management tool, we sent out these reports years and years ago automatically to our clients. Nobody in here even looked at these reports. They just got sent out to the clients, and whatever the score was, whatever the patch score was, is what it was. Nobody reviewed that with the client to see where they were. I think that's an important element. It's great to have these reports and statistics, but you have to review and understand what they really mean. And the provider needs to have a process for looking into patching and the reasoning why machines aren't 100% updated or not, or why they're not receiving these patches. So I don't know, I'll leave it up to Noman to discuss, what a real good frequency they think is for reviewing.
Mike, let me just jump in before Noman does, because this is something that comes up with a lot of people asking this question at industry events and trade shows and stuff like that. And again, with the frank and blunt answer, in 2020, if you are having these kind of conversations, or you are forced to have these kind of conversations with your provider, that isn't necessarily a great sign, because providers in 2020, good ones, good managed service providers, and there are a lot of them out there, this is part of the process that they use. It's a no-brainer. We know these things have to be done. 10 years ago, you could be asking these questions to your provider. If you're still asking these questions, then you should probably give your provider or certainly review it with them in the strongest possible terms.
Yeah. Oh yeah, very, very good answer. Way bigger things that you should be looking on your network. Like this should just be a basic element. So as a follow-up question, we review quarterly. Is that enough? What is your best practice? I mean, we have a process where we're looking at it monthly internally here. Probably reviewing it quarterly is, again, if there's a process in place to ensure that those things are happening, yeah, you could look at it quarterly. It's not going to help you for 2 months ago.
No,
if everything is out of date.
That's the problem.
So quarterly isn't frequently enough, but reviewing with you as the client, again, you want to understand what your provider's process is around that. And I'll just tell it to you like this: if there's not a lot of process around a lot of other things, and really all you're getting is just a basic generic report that shows how many tickets you had, how many patches the machines have, what was your uptime, like that basic canned report, then you're probably missing out on a lot of the more important elements that you should be discussing with your provider. So if you're having a quarterly meeting with your provider, what is the agenda? Is it brought to you proactively, or is the agenda to ask you how you're feeling about the service and where you think the problems are? should be coming from a proactive nature.
Again, yeah, I mean, if you're reviewing patching with your IT provider quarterly, that's a much bigger red flag, because
Yeah.
it's not, it shouldn't be. I mean, Noman, who's our director of technology, has built a process around our patching of not just Windows and Microsoft stuff, but Adobe and a ton of other things that are out there. I built a testing process that before they get rolled out, we test them to make sure they're not going to break anything as much as we possibly can. And all of this is invisible to the client, because there really is, as Mike said, way more important things that you should be talking about quarterly than patching.
Certainly we can have a conversation, Jeff, if you wanted to get in touch and have a conversation offline just to talk through, what our process around this and the other things around best practices look like for what we're doing in managing and maintaining. You can, take that back and kind of compare it with what you're doing, maybe help you have a conversation with your current provider about it.
Yeah, and I just want to jump into one bit of here. When you get those reports, you have to be very careful how you interpret them, because what it shows is it shows as 80. If it shows 80% like updates or 80% score, that only means it's the 80% of whatever your IT provider has actually approved to be patched up. So it doesn't mean that's all of them. If they are not doing, as Shell said, the testing and allowing the new patches to come down, getting it installed, getting it tested, all that kind of stuff. If they're not following that process, then you might actually be getting 100% score, but that 100% score will be 6 months old because there wasn't anything new approved in the patch software, right? So it's a lot. It's a bigger conversation, and certainly, if Mike, if you need me on that call with Jeff, I can be on that call.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so that's all the questions that we had. Again, anybody out there still have other questions or something comes up after the fact, again, send me an email, mike@pacetechnical.com, and look out for access to the recording. And hope everybody is staying safe and staying well, and wishing everybody all the best and hoping that we get out of this thing quickly. Okay, take care, everybody. Bye now.